you have recently moved to JMW Solicitors, which is your most recent career move. How are you finding it? It's been a bit strange, isn't it? Because you moved over just when the lockdown started.
Yeah, it was a tiny bit weird. I took the month of, I left Anthony Gold at the end of March. I technically took April off. Actually, I spent a chunk of April writing a book, and ended up, actually, as lockdown kicked in, I started doing some webinars for people.
Yeah, and you were constantly on LinkedIn. There was a lot of...
I posted lots of things on LinkedIn about coronavirus, so my wife wasn't terribly pleased with my purported April off because it wasn't much off. And then I started at JMW on the 1st of May, which has been weird. I haven't met many of the people. I've only been in the office a few times. Most of the people I've met have been by waving at them down like this, down a Zoom call, like we're doing right now. So it's different, but it's exciting as well. I mean, I moved for a number of reasons. One of the main ones, though, really was having a better nexus of people doing work that was more complementary to my own, and what I do is complemented what they're doing, and that's really helped to start to build some quite interesting and exciting stuff together for the sector.
So where do you see your career going in the future then?
Wow, who knows? I don't know. I was hoping to retire next year.
What about your plans for your? Do you have plans for the department at JMW? Because presumably you've come along to kickstart a service more for the private rented sector. Is that correct?
Well, they were doing a certain amount of PRS work, but I think there are things that they've got some build to rent clients that I'd like to get them all the way through. In that they're not really dealing with the end product very much, which was interesting to me. Some level I don't control it. It kind of depends what the government chooses to do. I mean, we've got regulation of property agents, which I think is really interesting. I think there are real opportunities for the agency sector to change its relationship with people, both in estate agency and lettings agency. There are online agents becoming very big in the letting sector. There are traditional agents changing their business models. I think there are just a huge range of different things there. And then I think it kind of depends what landlords do. There's been an aspect in which some landlords are choosing to leave the sector, so there'll be a slightly smaller number of landlords with slightly larger portfolios. I think the benefit of moving to a firm like JMW is you've got a constellation of people who are better placed to serve those kind of people doing tax. I've got planning lawyers, I've got immigration lawyers, and we're all able to, and we all have a property interest. So there's a better range of services that link up with where the sector might go. But there are so many possibilities.
What about your mediation work? Because we haven't talked about that. You are a mediator as well. Do you do much of that stuff?
No, I trained as a mediator and I have done some mediations, but my interest in mediation has been mostly focused around the law of mediation and its use as a practical tool within dispute resolution. And indeed, my books on mediation are more about how to get the best out of a mediation as a party than in being a mediator. To be honest, I'd have to spend an awful lot of time marketing myself as a mediator if I wanted to be a mediator. I don't have the time right now. A lot of mediators are people who have stepped back from full-time practice, so I might save it for my alleged retirement, which might never happen. And we'll see how it develops. I'm not convinced that mediation will stay the same longer term. I think it'll almost certainly get folded into a wider dispute resolution model using similar techniques, but not necessarily it being a discrete thing on its own.
I suppose this could lead into talks about housing courts and stuff like that, because I think you've been fairly vocal on that, haven't you? You've had your own views about the housing court.
I have said that I think a specialist housing court might be a better way of resolving things. I think mediation is helpful, or mediation concepts are helpful in some housing issues, but I don't think that they solve all housing disputes. I think part of the problem is that far too many court cases around housing are being taken for other reasons. So too often, for example, tenants are saying, well, I can't leave because unless you evict me, the local authority won't rehouse me properly and won't treat me as homeless. So you've got sort of silly reasons for people to end up in court, which a housing court don't fix. I think, yes, a housing court has benefits, and I think it's a bit mad now that you're in a situation where, you know, depending on the nature of your dispute, you could end up in the first tier tribunal property, first tier tribunal regulatory, the magistrates court, the county court, the high court, depending on what it is. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's reasons for having diversity in court systems, but I think it's gone too far, and there would be benefits from bringing it back together. I have been accused of saying that it should all be like a tribunal. That is not. That may have been misquoted a bit. That's not exactly what I said. I think there are aspects of the way the system is worked in the first tier tribunal, including use of mediation, and more use of online stuff and more use of paper-based decision making, that would be beneficial in terms of moving stuff forward elsewhere. But you've got to have proper access to justice. You know, tenants who are being thrown out of their homes, however, I appreciate people won't agree with this, but fair enough, that's up to you. They have a right to be heard.
Yeah.
And the reality is most tenants don't show up to possession hearings. That's not a good thing.
No.
I actually think it would be better if more tenants came, even if they were to then be told they don't have a case. Because what you end up with if they don't is you end up with late applications to stay warrants, which almost always fail, but burn up a lot of time and cost across the system.
And if they turn up to court, if indeed we're ever able to run courts in the old way, they get access to the duty solicitor, who can give them a bit of advice at a better time than the enforcement stage.
Well, I mean, of course, it would be better actually if they got advice earlier than that.
Not quite, yes, but they don't, do they?
Oh yes, but then that's to do with funding of housing law centres and things like that, which is massively cut. I know a lot of landlords think it's terrible that tenants get to defend stuff on spurious grounds, but the reality is that from what I've seen across my work, very few tenants come forward telling lies. Yes, of course, some do, but so do landlords. You know, people tell lies.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a difference of view. But generally speaking, where tenants have a valid case, it should be heard.
Yeah.
If you think that the law is badly drafted, that's a different discussion. I do think the law is badly drafted and unnecessarily complicated and doesn't necessarily achieve its objectives. But given that it's been drafted by a democratically elected parliament, then people should deal with that with their MP, not by blaming the courts and saying, oh, tenants get given too much shrift. I mean, the reality is that they don't. And the truth is that England and Wales has a relatively deregulated housing system by comparison with a large number of other countries. Now, I think there are benefits to that, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't have access to justice as well. I know, and in fact, many people's complaints are more about the fact that the court system is too slow because it's badly run and badly funded and badly structured. Yeah, and those are things we need to deal with.
Yeah, whether we will or not, I don't know. Another area of interest that you have is, of course, data protection, and you have recently written a book
I wave a book. There you go.
Hey, there you go.
About the general data protection regulations. But again, I mean, I don't have an interest in GDPR. I have an interest in property and property agency, and GDPR is important in property and property agency because property agents deal with a large amount of personal data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the fascinating thing as we sit here talking in the shadow of coronavirus is that now includes asking people whether or not they've had coronavirus and asking about their health.
Yeah.
And asking them if they've got underlying conditions, which really are none of your business, arguably, which might mean that they are shielding. So normally the idea that an agent could go to a tenant and say, if you've got cancer, bit of, weakened immune system, they could and should tell you to get lost. But now the government's actually positively encouraging people to go and ask tenants that.
Well, it's a condition of being able to restart your possession claim for...
Well, quite. I mean, you're almost being asked to go and interfere with people's personal health issues and ask them about them so you can establish whether or not they're shielding. So I think, and data protection has a lot to say about that stuff. So I think it's quite an interesting situation.
Okay, well...
my next book is not about... I've already agreed to write 2 more books for the same author. Publisher. I don't know why. I said I wouldn't write anymore for a while and then promptly agreed to write 2 more books for the same publisher.
Can you share the topics?
Yes, I'll tell you what they are. One of them, the first one, which is due by the end of the year, is on housing law in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. So different jurisdiction altogether, partly because there aren't many guides to housing law in Northern Ireland. I know a fair bit about law in Northern Ireland, even though I'm not qualified in that jurisdiction. And the second one, which is due middle of next year, which is timed for a reason, is about housing law in Wales.
Yeah.
And of course, my aim will be to have it out there around about the time the Renting Homes Wales Act, on which I worked at its bill stage, comes into force.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Okay, I think probably we've reached the end of a long interview. Thank you for being so patient. We'll no doubt be meeting again in other contexts. So thank you very much, David.
Thank you.